Good morning. We'll give everybody a 1-minute countdown, so please find a seat and please take it. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Bill Johnson. I'm Director of Palm Beach County Emergency Management Division of the Public Safety Department, and also Vice President and Program Chair of the Governor's Hurricane Conference as a representative to the Florida Emergency Preparedness Association. I'd like to welcome you to the general session of the 32nd Annual Governor's Hurricane Conference, and more importantly, I'd like to welcome to my hometown, Palm Beach County. We decided to add a little bit of ambiance earlier in the week, so I hope you enjoyed some of that tropical-like atmosphere that we gave you, and we're hoping that that clears out soon. So let's get started right away. Without further ado, if everyone would please rise for the presentation of the colors by the Palm Beach County Fire Rescue Department Honor Guard. Everyone, please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. It gives me a great pleasure to announce or introduce for you Emma Shea Nemeth, an 11th grader attending Alexander Dreyfus School of the Arts, who will join us in providing the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the its red glare, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you. Please be seated. Many thanks go to the Palm Beach County Fire Rescue Department Honor Guard and Emma Shea Namath from the Palm Beach County District's Alexander Dreyfus School of the Arts. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the Mayor of Palm Beach County, the Honorable Melissa McKinley. Mayor McKinley was elected to the Board of County Commissioners in 2014. Prior to her election, Mayor McKinley spent nearly 20 years working at all three levels of government, advocating on behalf of women, children, and families, and as a legislative aide for Palm Beach County. In addition to her public service, Mayor McKinley has spent a great deal of her career volunteering for such organizations as the Junior Leagues of Florida, the Homeless Coalition of Palm Beach County, Voices for Children of Palm Beach County, and is founding member of the Palm Beach County Sexual Assault Response Team. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present to you Mayor Melissa McKinley.
Good morning. I have to say, I grew up in Sarasota, Florida, and I was a member of the Riverview High School Kilty Marching Band that had a bagpipe corps, and so every time I hear the bagpipes, my feet start to do the Highland dance. But anyhow, good morning. As Palm Beach County Mayor and on behalf of the Board of County Commissioners, I want to welcome you to the 32nd Annual Governor's Hurricane Conference. We're happy that you'll be spending a few days with us here in Palm Beach County, and we did all we could to make sure that the rain we've had for the last 48 hours went away for you so you could enjoy your experience. We're pleased to be hosting this annual conference for the second year in a row, and we look forward to you all coming back here for the next 4 years as we host this conference, and many thanks to the governor and his team for allowing us that honor. Besides bringing a wealth of training and awareness to our community, this conference will have an economic impact on our local community of about $2.1 million. The folks in this room have registered more than 3,000 room nights for this week, and our exhibit and registration numbers are well ahead of where they were last year. A lot of you have come from many different places to be here. We have over 30 states and 12 foreign countries represented in the room with us today. And also, I'd be remiss in my leadership role with the Florida Association of Counties if I didn't recognize that we have 62 of Florida's 67 counties represented today. Thank you. And I promise you I'll do all I can to find out who those 5 missing counties are. We have 175 different companies and organizations represented in our exhibits today. And we're happy to announce that this is the largest tropical cyclone conference in the United States. So, speaking of cyclones, the tornadoes were a couple days ago, and those won't be coming back. Palm Beach County is one of the most special, most unique areas in the United States because of our weather and our gorgeous beaches. It's a tourist mecca, a snowbird sanctuary, I use that word lightly, and a thriving business center. Tourism is one of the most important aspects of our local economy, and protecting our visitors is one of the things of utmost importance to our local government, as well as our year-long residents. Officials with Discover the Palm Beaches are reporting excellent numbers for this past year. Despite Hurricane Irma, we had 7.9 million people visit the Palm Beaches in 2017. That's 1 million more than we had 3 years ago. Visitation from domestic and Florida staycation markets continues to be strong, as those of us who are trying to find a little weekend getaway can attest to. Direct visitor spending accounted for $4.6 billion, that's with a B, in dollars in 2016, and our tourism industry currently provides over 80,000 direct and indirect jobs to our local residents. Palm Beach County is among the fastest growing areas in the country. Just a couple weeks ago, I spoke at an event with the governor, and he recognized that we've got one of the most thriving business markets in the state of Florida, so we are honored to hold that role. With this growth, though, comes explosive residential and commercial development near our coastal areas. This growth and development has occurred during a period of relative calm, but Palm Beach County has a storied history of intense hurricanes, tornadoes, violent lightning storms, flooding, droughts, and wildfires. And, I represent the coastal, or the lakeside communities of Belglade, South Bay, and Pahokee. And so, the whole conversation really started in our community with the 1928 hurricane that cost a few thousand lives and gave birth to the Army Corps of Engineers when they took on the construction of the Herbert Hoover Dike. But readiness is everyone's job. That's our motto. I think that's the theme for the conference today. And we are ready, and we are ready to host this conference for you all. Palm Beach County partners with numerous stakeholders to make sure our visitors are prepared in the case of an impending storm. We also actively work to educate and prepare our new residents. Thousands of people move to Florida each year, and with the growth in the tourism sector, many people seeking these new jobs have moved into our county. Since 2013, 12 new hotels have opened or will open in Palm Beach County, adding 1,893 rooms to our market, and we're actually going to need more for this conference next year. 5 additional hotels are expected to open by the end of the year, and our largest new hotel, many of you are staying at, is just across the hallway here. It's our 400-room Hilton West Palm Beach. It opened in 2016, provides nearly 1,000 jobs and $51 million in annual wages. As we head into this year's hurricane season, we are preparing for the needs of our residents. The last 2 years have not been kind to us. With Hurricanes Matthew and Irma, we recognize that our storms are getting stronger and more intense. We did manage to dodge direct hits from both of those storms, but we still had significant damage in the area. We can't really compare that, though, to the onslaught we saw in 2004 and 2005. I have to tell you, I moved to Florida when I was 6 years old in 1977. I moved to Palm Beach County in 2004. During that time, I'd never been hit by a hurricane until I moved here. So to my fellow commissioners, my apologies for bringing hurricanes your way. We continue to recognize the importance of readiness. It only takes one storm to remind us of Mother Nature's fury. Matthew and Irma were great examples of that. If that one storm does affect you, you can be assured that Palm Beach County is ready and able to respond quickly to the needs of our residents. I'm very proud, and I know the rest of my commissioners are very proud of Bill Johnson and his team and the rest of our emergency management program and the capabilities of our emergency response team. We all hope Florida will be spared this season, but it's everyone's responsibility to be prepared in case of a major storm. Government alone cannot begin to handle all of the adverse impacts. It is up to each and every resident to be prepared, have evacuation plans in place, and make sure our homes are as secure as possible. You need to have a plan, build a kit, be informed, and get involved. We encourage every Palm Beach County resident and every resident throughout Florida to be prepared to spend several days without electricity, meaning you need to have enough food, water, fuel, clothing, and medicine. And if you must seek public shelter, please register in advance for your special needs shelter. Don't wait until the week of the storm. You can do that anytime throughout the year. Let your family know where you are going if you have to evacuate to a public shelter so they know where to find you after the storm. And now, as we learned this year, make sure you bring blankets and pillows and a mat to sleep on because the shelters don't have cots most of the time. In addition, while you're here, I hope that we'd like to give you some good options for your downtime if our event management team has given you any of that. I hope you'll find some time to discover the beauty and excitement of Palm Beach County and the hospitality we are pleased to extend your way during your stay. In addition to taking a walk along our 47-mile coastline, the county has a variety of natural environments that offer fascinating strolls, including the trails at Murakami Museum, Wakutahatchee Wetlands, and at Green Cay Nature Center. For a higher level of activity, you can explore our snorkeling and diving sites, our fishing piers, our biking trails, and over 160 golf courses. There's some important guy in the White House who's got a golf course right around the corner if you're interested. Or perhaps go kayaking on the Loxahatchee Wild and Scenic River in Riverbend Park. But for those not quite so active like I am, I invite you to stroll a few blocks north of here and enjoy the many amenities that we have either on Clematis Street or at City Place. I wish you all a successful conference. I thank you for visiting us. And remember, have a plan, build a kit, be informed. Take advantage of the Hurricane Preparedness Sales Tax Holiday that starts on June 1st. And thank you to all of the local electeds and the local emergency management teams, because when we experience a storm, we all know that that's where you start for help. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Mayor McKinley. We want you to be social with us here throughout the entire week at the Governor's Hurricane Conference. We have a multifaceted social media program. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and we also have a new improved mobile app for the conference. It will help you navigate your way through the entire conference and the over 300 hours of trainings and workshops. You can download that app free on iTunes and Google Play. Just search for GHC 2018. Like us on Facebook at Florida GHC, follow us on Twitter at FLGHC, and monitor hashtag GHC2018 and hashtag Hurricane Hunt. Say that fast 3 times. Speaking of social, we'd like you to take part in our virtual social media functional exercise called Hurricane Hunt. It's an interactive, real-time social media exercise that accommodates all levels of skill sets in social media. It's helped to design us to prepare for using social media during a disaster. The exercise is completely virtual. There's no physical component, so you won't have to block off valuable time to participate. To participate, please see us at the social media lounge and talk with the Hurricane Hunt folks. Again, thanks to the FSU Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program for putting on the exercise. Final results will be announced at the Social Media Exercise Recap Workshop number 159, which occurs on Friday morning at 10:30 over in the Hilton Coral Ballroom C on the first floor. And of course, we'll notify everyone via social media. Next, it is my honor to present to you Governor Rick Scott. Rick Scott was elected governor of the great state of Florida in 2010. As promised during his campaign, he focused on creating jobs and turning Florida's economy around. Governor Scott is a veteran of the United States Navy. He earned his law degree from Southern Methodist University. He has been known as an innovator in business, healthcare, and politics. As the 45th governor of the state of Florida, he has promoted job creation, education, tax cuts, and the reduction of government spending. It is my honor to present to you the Honorable Governor Rick Scott. Thank you.
Bill and I said it's nice to see each other without a hurricane. Typically, the only time I see Bill is had bad floods in West Palm Beach County and then the hurricanes. Well, first off, thanks everybody for being here. As governor of the state, if you don't live here, I hope you take the opportunity to spend every dime you have. The credit cards will work here. Our economy is tied to tourism. One of every 6 jobs in our state is tied to tourism, so we like it if you'd spend a lot of money. And then we also sell a lot of homes. We like it if you use the homes, but reality is if you don't use the home, you still pay your property taxes. And so I hope you do that. This is a wonderful state. The mayor has talked a lot about Palm Beach County, and it actually is a wonderful place to live, and it's a great place to do business. So, Mayor, thank you for all your hard work, making sure this is one of the best places to live, work, and play. So let me recognize a few people first. And the biggest thing I can tell you today is just thank you for what you all do every day. I want to thank Bill Johnson for his hard work. We've had the opportunity to work together. Wes Mall is here. Wes is the Director of Emergency Management. He was Chief of Staff last year and did a great job during Irma, and then was very helpful to Puerto Rico with Maria. I want to recognize Brock Long. Brock always took my phone calls when I asked for a lot of things from FEMA. I want to thank Gracia Check, who is the Regional Administrator for the Southeast, who has been there the entire time I've been governor, and she's always been unbelievably responsive. I want to thank Kenneth Graham, the Director of National Hurricane Center, for being here, and hopefully we won't have any hurricanes. It'd be nice to have my 8th year not have a hurricane. I want to recognize Representative Jeanette Nunez. Everything happens in the legislature, Jeanette's part of it. Whether Melissa talked about the fact that this year we have a full week hurricane sales tax holiday. Representative Nunez was part of making that happen, but we've been in office at the same time, and she's just a very hard worker. I want to thank all of our agency heads in Florida for what they've done. I want to thank everybody at the State Emergency Management Team for what they've done. I want to thank our National Guard, Highway Patrol, all of our agencies for what they've done. Most importantly, I want to thank you for doing this. What you do every day is you save lives, most importantly, and number 2, you improve lives. We've had 7 storms, I think, in the last 2 years, and by having this conference, by doing what you do, you've helped this state in particular respond in the right manner and then get back to work quickly. Irma was very scary, and could have been devastating, but everybody worked together. One of the things we've tried to do really well here is get our utilities back on. All of our utilities have worked well together, and we got the power back on very rapidly. For anybody that didn't have power in their first week, like my daughter, I'm sure they didn't think it was rapidly enough, but everybody actually did work really well together. So thank you for what you've done to prepare. Thank you for what you've done for Irma. On top of that, there are a lot of you who were helpful with Maria. We are the only state that signed a host agreement with Puerto Rico. We opened up 2 relief centers, and we took care of a lot of individuals. We helped them get shelter. We helped them get different housing, get into our education system, health care, food. There were a lot of not-for-profits that helped. So I want to thank everybody for doing that. If there's anything that you think we need to work on, I hope you feel comfortable reaching out to me. I know FDOT did a study to see if there's ways that we can improve the evacuation, which I think everybody worked hard to make that go as smoothly as possible, but there's always ways to improve. And I want to thank everybody for doing that. But have a great conference, spend your money, buy a house, and pray for that we won't have a hurricane. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Governor Scott. Again, so much appreciated and appreciate all of your support. To provide a cutting-edge conference like the Governor's Hurricane Conference, it takes a great deal of support from many of our sponsors and partners. The Governor's Hurricane Conference has 4 sponsors: the Florida Emergency Preparedness Association, the American Red Cross, the National Weather Service, and the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Each sponsoring agency holds a seat on the board of directors, and I would like to ask that we recognize each of those directors. Mr. Paul Womble, Director of Polk County Emergency Management and past president of the Florida Emergency Preparedness Association. Mr. Jack Morgan, Disaster Volunteer of the Southeast and Caribbean region for the American Red Cross. Mr. Stephen Cooper, Director of the Southern region of the National Weather Service. And Mr. Albert Moscoso, the Director of Communications and External Affairs for the Florida Division of Emergency Management. We also have 22 officers and several hard-working committees, such as the Program Committee, the Awards Committee, Marketing and Outreach, Educational Outreach, Audit, Support, and other committees and work groups that are all comprised of representatives of each of these sponsoring organizations, and all are volunteers. They donate hundreds of hours of their valuable time to manage the operational aspects of this conference. On behalf of the Governor's Hurricane Conference, I would like to sincerely thank each of the sponsoring agencies and their representatives for all of their tremendous support of the conference. I would also like to take a moment to thank the multitude of other volunteers that are working behind the scenes in this conference to make it so successful. We have room monitors, registration staff, my audiovisual wizards back there, computer technology geniuses, certificate preparers, logistical volunteers that haul and move literally tons of equipment to and from our home office in Tarpon Springs, drivers, runners, and countless more. They log hours and hours throughout this entire and very long week, and others who dedicate their hundreds of more hours before and after the conference to make this conference the excellent value that it is and an outstanding experience for you. I would ask all of our conference volunteers, officers, and directors to please stand. We owe them all a debt of gratitude. Let's all show them our support and give them an appreciative applause, please. So let's just take a few minutes to discuss our conference theme. Readiness is everyone's job. Now that Matthew and Irma have more than quenched the recent decade-long drought of cyclones, the program committee chose to focus on how messaging impacts overall readiness in this year's theme. The bottom line is that we all own a messaging problem. Many of us learned in Irma that we need to make our messaging more effective in motivating people to be ready for a disaster. We need to convince everyone, that is citizens, politicians, government leaders, and businesses, that we're all in this together and we all need to be prepared and ready. Clearly, everyone needs to be prepared for disasters. History teaches us that our communities and our neighbors need to improve their readiness for multiple reasons. A recent study found that 51% of Floridians were unprepared for Hurricane Irma. There are many that are still unprepared. Florida's population is 20.4 million. An estimated 6.8 million people evacuated for Hurricane Irma, but only 3.8 million actually resided in areas that were ordered to evacuate. That's a 3 million person shadow evacuation. We have an over-evacuation problem. Why? Because I think people still tune in too much on the wind hazard. People gravitate to whatever piece of information they can find to convince themselves that they don't have a hurricane problem. Our messaging needs to overcome that noise. People are too focused on evacuation to the point that I think it distracts them from meaningful preparedness efforts. People also don't realize how deadly and damaging storm surge and floodwater can be. The problem is that, as you learned last year, evacuation is not an innocuous activity, and it isn't the solution for most Floridians. The National Hurricane Study showed that there's approximately 12% mortality rate associated with evacuation. Nearly 30% of those in Irma that evacuated spent more than $1,000. More people than necessary go further than they have to, and they take up hotels and are fueled in doing so. The simple messaging is evacuate miles, not hundreds of miles. So we need to rethink how we promote readiness. We know that the media plays a critical role in the formation of public attitudes. Yet while the media provides many of the vivid images of devastation that help the public's perceptions of the scope of the disaster and the magnitude of the consequences, they rarely close that loop by reinforcing the importance of readiness and/or the consequences of unpreparedness or underpreparedness. In 2006, respondents believed that evacuation would be dangerous. They felt that roads would be too crowded, shelters would be undesirable, and they would not have access to food, water, and fuel. These concerns are likely fueled by vivid media images showing freeway congestions, lines at shelters, lines at hardware stores, empty grocery store shelves, and long lines at fuel pumps. All these images represent barriers to action. We need to overcome those areas, and the lack of wherewithal or the will on the part of the public presents a recurring challenge to all of us. Effectively communicating to the people of a disaster is critical. It is essential that our messages about disasters are consistent and that the information on how to deal with the risk is clear and as concise as possible. I ask our media colleagues to truly partner with your local emergency managers to focus more on the perspective of residents in the affected area, focus on how they are preparing for and responding to the disaster, demonstrate the benefits of a timely and appropriate response, and provide a sharper image of the magnitude and scope of the approaching storm. These efforts may be far more influential than those far too common images of windblown reporters on the local beach. Our private sector also plays an important role in the readiness spectrum. Retailers such as big box hardware stores, drugstores, grocery stores, and the petroleum industry can be effective partners in conveying messages about readiness activities, supplies that should be in a disaster kit, and sound response strategies. Unfortunately, however, nearly all of their marketing strategies focus on other topics. While I get the need to focus on the bottom line, businesses can effectively shift their focus by providing relevant disaster preparedness information to their customers. If they link readiness to their products, it's a win-win for everyone. In PSAs like television ads, newspapers, social media streams, electronic billboards, and even on their website. If AT&T can air commercials solely about distracted driving, I think the rest of our retailers and partners can do the same, emphasizing the importance of disaster readiness. Further, public sector obviously plays a role in our overall readiness. Are we emergency managers using relevant data and current technology to ensure that our planning, zoning, and building codes keep up with the recent research and lessons learned? Are we letting our building code slip? The lessons of Andrew drove many building code changes, and since then we have confirmed over and over that building codes work. Let's not let this progress slip. Historically, we've used imprecise technology to foster readiness. Our messages have often been too complex, too vague, and in some cases untimely. Do our websites convey clear and simple instructions on how to prepare or respond to a disaster? Do they effectively manage expectations? Since much of the vital rescue work is done, such as first aid, providing injured and transporting injured to the hospitals, and providing food and shelter, since much of that work is done by friends, neighbors, and those on the scene who are themselves disaster victims, do we promote preparedness that goes beyond encouraging individuals to stockpile pallets of water and include basic skills about helping each other? Do we work to minimize shadow evacuation by encouraging in-region evacuation? Have we developed strategies that encourage and leverage private sector investments in readiness and community resilience? And finally, do we set the agenda for our public sector counterparts? I hope so, and I hope that we, too, focus on the advantages of readiness in lieu of how bad things are or could be. Let's keep our messages positive, acknowledge and celebrate those that did well. A lot was done in Irma, well, bigger, faster, and better than Andrew and the remarkable 2004 and 05 season. Winn-Dixie has installed generators at 31 of its 88 stores, from the Florida Keys through Palm Beach County. Publix has done the same. Of 264 Publix stores, nearly all have generators. Big box retailers like Home Depot, Lowe's, and Walmart have instituted sophisticated command centers that rival many EOCs to pre-stage supplies to ensure that product and services are delivered and continue to flow into devastated areas. Electricity is being restored in record time. After 1 day of restoration, Florida Power and Light returned power to 40% of the more than 5 million customers who lost it after Irma, compared to only 4% in the same period after Hurricane Wilma. Since 2006, the Florida Power and Light has invested $3 billion to fortify its infrastructure and its grid. During Hurricane Wilma, FP&L lost 12,400 utility poles. During Irma, only 4,600 poles were lost. That was a 63% improvement. During Hurricane Wilma, FP&L lost 5 substations. During Irma, only 1. Cell phone companies have invested millions in equipment to restore service after storms. They have assembled herds of cows, colts, goats, and massive trailers and temporary structures filled with mobile communication systems, workstations, and charging systems. Verizon is even experiencing with remote-controlled drones to serve as small flying cell sites to provide service in devastated areas that have lost coverage. Predictions are even becoming more precise, thanks largely to the improvements of forecast models, computer power, and satellite technology. When a storm is 3 days out, our friends over at the National Hurricane Center can predict its path within 100 miles. That's down from 170 miles just 10 years ago. And finally, I'm hoping that Hurricane Harvey may have convinced those 9 out of 10 people who didn't think they needed flood insurance to rethink that and invest in it. The public, media, private sector, and policymakers all need to understand the role that readiness plays in disaster recovery. We all need to understand that we play a critical role in readiness. We need to clear up our delivery, managing expectations, and pursue everyone to do their part. Hurricanes don't have to be devastating, especially when everyone is ready and everyone does their job. Thank you. As the conference has grown, so has the partnership with our exhibitors, and today they continue to be our most loyal supporters. Please show your recognition of this partnership by visiting the exhibit hall and participating in the activities we have planned for you. At the conclusion of this session, the exhibit hall will be open and there will be a complimentary lunch at noon for those that are registered. This evening at 5 p.m., there will be a complimentary reception in the exhibit hall for all registered attendees. Please remember to wear your name tag and bring your ticket, please. Tomorrow between 10 a.m. and 11:45 a.m., we'll have dedicated time to exclusively spend in the exhibit hall, so please join us tomorrow morning as well. And remember that the exhibit hall closes tomorrow at noon, so please be sure to manage your time wisely. So now let's get started with our general session program. Our first speaker this morning is Representative Jeanette Nunez. Representative Nunez was first elected to the Florida House of Representatives in 2010. She currently represents the 119th District and covers western and northern portions of Miami-Dade County. In 2016, Representative Nunez became Speaker pro tempore and currently serves as the Vice Chair of the Appropriation Committee. In 2017, after Hurricane Irma, House Speaker Richard Corcoran appointed Representative Nunez to serve as Chair of the Select Committee on Hurricane Response and Readiness. to conduct a broad review of the state's response and preparedness. Representative Nunez sponsored several bills to keep our children safe, create jobs, expand new business opportunities, and reduce the regularity burdens that are placed on small businesses. Representative Nunez attended Florida International University, receiving her master's degree in public administration, and it is my privilege today to introduce to you Representative Jeanette Nunez.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Bill, for that introduction, and I also wanted to thank Governor Scott for his kind words. I just want to add a caveat. He said that I'm responsible for everything that happens in the legislature. I only take responsibility for the good stuff. So the bad stuff is somebody else's responsibility. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to be here on such an important date. Thank you to the mayor and to the hospitality of Palm Beach County for allowing me to be a speaker today. As Bill mentioned, I had the privilege of serving under Speaker Corcoran as the Speaker pro tempore, and also he tasked me with chairing the Select Committee on Hurricane Response and Preparedness. And as you can imagine, that was no easy task, but certainly pales in comparison to the work that all of you do day in and day out to make sure that Florida is ready. Certainly, I think we would be remiss if we did not thank Governor Scott for his decisive action, his quick ability to assess the situation, to make sure that we could do everything in each of our communities to keep Floridians safe. So I believe that we owe Governor Scott a huge debt of gratitude for his hard work. In the aftermath of Hurricane Irma, as I mentioned, the Select Committee was formed, and I was tasked with gathering information, with assessing the role that the state plays in making sure that Floridians are prepared and being able to respond to natural disasters, in particular hurricanes. As chair of the committee, I had the opportunity to travel across the state to meet with many of you all that are here today, and it really was a learning experience. As a native Floridian, I'm no stranger to hurricanes, but like many in our state, had grown somewhat complacent to the ever-growing warnings that we receive, and then certainly seeing hurricanes sort of drift off into the coast. So I myself had a tremendous learning experience sitting with so many local emergency managers, mayors, city managers, and folks on the ground. And certainly, I met with individuals in Monroe County, in Lee, Collier, Flagler, St. John's. I met with our farmers, our citrus growers. I met with our industries, our stakeholders, with the electric utilities. So it really was a comprehensive approach for myself, to educate myself, but also to make sure that we had ample information and that we had the tools necessary to do our job as committee members. We had the opportunity to visit with some of our local shelters. I had the opportunity to meet with the leadership at Florida International University, which serves as the official shelter for Monroe County, but they also took the responsibility of hosting special needs individuals, and even took individuals from some of the Caribbean island nations that were affected by the storms as well. So again, it really was a very interesting, eye-opening experience for me personally, and I know that the committee shared in learning and in assessing and in trying to develop policies that would certainly address some of the challenges. We held nearly 20 hours of committee hearings. We discussed fundamental topics that were set forth in our charter, everything from vulnerable populations, evacuations, fuel supplies, debris removal, you name it, we talked about it. And it was a miracle that we were able to get through all of those topics within the time allotted. Many of you that are here today were gracious enough to serve as panel experts. You were gracious enough to fly to Tallahassee. Even, and I'll tell a little story, I hope he doesn't mind, our Monroe County emergency manager, he flew up to Tallahassee very quickly. He didn't even bat an eye. He went up there to provide some expert testimony, and when he gets there, he shares a story of how when he got to Tallahassee, he realized he suffered damage as well. He had lost his ties. He didn't have any ties. So unfortunately, he had to go to a local store in Tallahassee and buy a very expensive, overpriced tie. But I hope you get a lot of use out of that tie, although I know in the Keys you don't wear too many ties. But again, from the storm, we learned so many lessons and confronted so many issues that arose given the unique nature of the storm. And I certainly don't need to tell you all how challenging and how historic a storm it really was, affecting both ends of the state, both coasts. The uncertainty, the magnitude, the depth, the breadth, the scope of the storm really was something I believe challenged us as Floridians across the state. And then again, one of the most tragic aspects of a storm is always the potential loss of life. And that was something we saw, unfortunately, in Broward County with the loss of life in Hollywood Hills. And I would tell you that that became a major focus of the legislature and of the committee. It really did weigh heavily on our minds how we were going to address that. And kudos again to the Scott administration for taking decisive action there. The Agency for Healthcare Administration promulgated rules. There was a lot of discussion with the industry stakeholders. And I think ultimately what passed and what was signed into law, we are better, our elderly, our vulnerable, are safer for it. And so that was one of the highlights, I would tell you, from my perspective, in dealing with the issues that we faced. As you know, we adopted a series of recommendations, many of which I'm proud to say were adopted. Unfortunately, as with the process, as you all know, for those of you that engage in the political process in Tallahassee, there's always a give and take and a back and forth. But in the end, I believe that we really addressed the issues through the committee perspective. And I'll just highlight a few of the things that we discussed, a few of the things we talked about. I already mentioned the rule requiring adequate power for nursing homes, which I think, again, was critical to prevent loss of life, especially for our elderly and our vulnerable. Certainly, you heard both Bill and the governor talk about evacuations. That was something that we worked very closely with DOT on. We wanted to make sure that we could address any inadequacies because, again, as a state, I think we sometimes get complacent. And so that was a focus to make sure that we're addressing those things from a state perspective that we can to make sure that Florida, again, is safer and more prepared. We talked about hardening and restoring our electric grid, and you heard some great statistics about the improvements we've made as a state. Again, I believe that there's opportunity for improvement there, but certainly we are on a positive trend as it relates to making sure the power gets restored. We know as local elected officials, I'm sure you heard quite a bit from your constituents, as did I. Day one, day two, everyone is eager to be helpful, eager to help their neighbors. Day 3 and 4, you're starting to get a little cranky. Day 5 and beyond, it is mass chaos. So I certainly would love to see that cut down, but understand the challenges that we had from an electric utility standpoint in restoring power to so many Floridians. Again, the issues with our farmers and our citrus growers, I can tell you, I toured various citrus growers' fields, and it was nothing short of devastating. For our economy, certainly for those individuals that have already suffered the effects of citrus greening, which has decimated many growers in the past, but certainly working with our federal partners as well, which is always critical, in particular in a storm situation. And I know you're going to hear from folks from FEMA, but it's key that we have those strong federal partnerships. And so I'm glad to tell you that we made a lot of progress on the agriculture front. And then lastly, restoring our communities. And again, I was on the ground and saw the hard work of so many in the respective EOCs, but it's a long process, right? I know many of your communities are still recovering and still rebuilding and will be for quite some time. But it's important, it's incumbent upon us to work together, to partner with you, to continue to focus on the issues that remain after Irma. And those are just a few of the highlights. Certainly there was a lot more that we worked on and focused on. But in the end, I can tell you, somebody told me, and it's curious, I think we talked about this before, all politics are local. And somebody told me all disasters are local too. And so that is true. But I also would encourage you, and my challenge to you today, as you go through this conference and as you prepare, I think we're 16 days away, roughly? As you prepare, I would encourage you to remember remain committed, to remain engaged with your legislative partners. I am at the end of my term. I am, as of November, will no longer be in office due to term limits. but I certainly hope to stay engaged in the legislative process. And I would challenge you to continue to remain engaged with your legislative partners. As you all know, the legislature only meets for 60 days out of the year in their official legislative session. And so we tend to be slightly reactive by nature, just because we have limited time to focus on issues. And I will tell you, towards the end of session, we were faced with another tragedy, the tragedy of the Parkland shooting, very close to here. And I could tell you that that really took the time, the energy, and the focus off everything else we were working on, and focused on that particular issue. And we passed comprehensive legislation that also we set aside $400 million. So I know some of you were disappointed with your EOC allotments or with affordable housing allotments, but I'll tell you, we really had to struggle at the end to find a way to keep our budget balance, but also address that particular tragedy. And so when I talk to people about legislative updates, I said we were bookended by tragedy, really and truly. You had, at the start of it, you had the hurricane, and at the end, you had the Parkland shooting. But certainly, I will tell you, I think it's critical that you keep the legislature on task as it relates to emergency management planning. There are many things that the House passed, and I'm not here to point fingers or cast blame, but the House did indeed pass a series of comprehensive bills and funding requests that the Senate didn't take up for various reasons. But at the end of the day, I believe those are a good baseline to start for the upcoming session next year. And so I would encourage you to keep your local delegations on task, to keep them focused on the important things that we need to do, because whether we have a storm this year or not, God willing, I think it's incumbent upon us to continuously update our protocols, our plans, and you here all are the experts to do that. So thank you again for the opportunity to share a few insights. I look forward to continuing to work with you, but I applaud you for your efforts in keeping Floridians safe. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Our next speaker this morning is Mr. Ken Graham, Director of the National Hurricane Center. Mr. Graham began his National Weather Service career as an intern forecaster in New Orleans in 1994. His career took him to the agency's Southern Region headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, as the Marine and Public Program Manager. He later became meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service forecast offices in Corpus Christi, Texas, Birmingham, Alabama, and most recently New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Ken has extensive experience working directly with emergency managers during numerous high-impact events. He has deployed to emergency operations centers and provided impact-based decision support briefings for emergency managers and elected officials, and delivered numerous training sessions and exercises related to tropical weather. Ken received his bachelor's degree at the University of Arizona and his master's degree from Mississippi State University. It is truly my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Ken Graham.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. As I look over the audience, I see so many first responders, military. I just want to kind of open this with a big-time thank you. You know, we talk about partners of the National Weather Service, partners of the National Hurricane Center. You know, when I look at the media partners that we have, and I look at emergency managers, it's more than partners, you're friends. And we definitely can't do it without you, so I appreciate it. Another quick thanks to the Weather Service offices, the National Hurricane Center. You know, just for 24 years, being able to work behind the scenes with the Weather Service people, some of the most dedicated, amazing people I've ever seen that care so much behind the scenes. So with the Weather Service people in the local offices and the Hurricane Center, can you stand up real quick? I just wanted to give you a quick shout out. Thank you. That's you too, Pablo. Thank you guys for everything you do. I want to tell you that and I go off script bad with these presentations, but I just wanted to tell you behind the scenes as a meteorologist, you know, no matter how accurate we are with the forecast, the storm still comes. And and it's interesting that after the storm, we become stronger as a community. Here in Florida, across the U.S., these disasters do bring out some of the best in us. So one thing I want to encourage you to do this week is to tell your stories with each other. Share your stories from these disasters, because it's amazing what we can learn from each other as we go through this process. And if you allow me, I wanted to kick off that conversation this week with one of my own stories. As a meteorologist, you put out a good forecast. I don't say we high five, but it gets close. It gets close. You put a good warning, you're like, yes, I got it. But then the reports of damage, injuries, fatalities come in, and it gets you. As a meteorologist, it does get you behind the scenes. And there was a time with a big flood. This happened to be in New Orleans. We wanted to do more. As meteorologists, we did a good forecast. We did a good job. We felt good. But so many people lost everything. So we delivered mattresses to those that lost everything. And I wanted to share the story of the very last delivery. The very last delivery of the day, the last mattress, and I knock on the door, and the door opens. And as you can tell, apparently I'm the tallest director, but that's a stat that I read on Twitter. I have no idea. But the door opens, and I got to look up at this guy. I said, hey, I'm Ken. We're delivering some mattresses. I look at this bare concrete floor. He lost everything. All his clothes. He told me his clothes went out the back door with this flood. Lost everything. Put the mattress down on this bare concrete. And you ever have one of those epiphanies? You walk out of your door and you think, I left my keys or I left my phone. It's one of those type of things. I walked out the door and I said, there's something else here. And I turned around and I said, hey, what else do you need? And he goes, well, I need a pair of shoes. I said, that's easy. We'll take care of that. What size do you wear? In the deepest voice that I'll never forget, he says, 19. Well, this was a certain situation. It was before the internet. You couldn't turn to the internet to get it, so it was all the local stores. Nobody's got a 19. So finally was able to get a 1-800 number, and this amazing company says, we're going to overnight those shoes to you, no cost. So the next day I got the box. What do you think a 19 comes in? Big box. And you go to this, I went back to the same place. Door opens. I said, here's your shoes. And that big man sat on the bare concrete, laced up them shoes. It seemed like it was hours, right? I should have laced them ahead of time. It took forever. The guy stood up, gave me a hug, and began to cry. You don't forget those stories. It changes you. Every one of these disasters change you. So I highly encourage you to share those stories this week, and I think we can all benefit from those. So now that I've taken half my time, we'll get to the slide presentation. That's typical me. So here we go with the slide presentation. Let's go to the first slide. What I wanted to do today is kind of give a review of the hurricane season. I'm not sure if I have a clicker. I do. Let's look at this. Everybody got affected. This is an interesting map. This is anybody that was under a warning or a watch this past season. That's a lot of people. So many people across the country were impacted by these storms. And if you look at it, you're going to hear a lot of facts and figures and review of the season, so I won't spend a ton of time with it. But look at this, 7th most active season, most hurricanes since 2005, a record 3 Category 4 landfalls. And look at that, we just visited the gauge recently. We got to see this gauge when we were in Texas not too long ago. The rainfall record, 60.58. And it was already mentioned, it's not just the wind, it's all these other impacts. And you're going to see a running theme with this presentation talking about that. Some other highlights, 5 Category 5 landfalls. It's incredible. 4 by Irma in the Caribbean, 1 by Maria, also in the Caribbean. Costliest year on record. Look at these numbers. 2nd for Harvey, 3rd Maria, 5th Irma, costliest individual storms. Very damaging year. Several hundred direct and indirect deaths in the U.S., but none known from storm surge. Really trying to, and by the way, historically speaking, storm surge accounts for 50% of the fatalities in tropical systems, and none this year. Harvey, just a couple reviews here. All the hazards. Deadliest since 1919 for Texas. Storm surge 8 to 10 feet near Rockport. Meandering track. I always kind of say this. It's a saying that I've said for a couple decades. Slow and large is our nemesis, right? The large ones provide impacts further away from the storm, and slower, you just get all the devastating impacts of the storm surge plus all the rainfall. And 57 tornadoes, the other one that we don't normally talk about. 57 tornadoes occurred with Harvey, some of which hundreds of miles away. Irma, very familiar with Irma here in Florida, as you all saw. Category 4 landfall in the Keys, Cat 3 in Southwest Florida, significant damage throughout the entire state. Another part of the conversation that we have to have is all the impacts outside the cone. When Irma expanded the wind field, that threw out the winds and storm surge hundreds of miles away from the center. And trying to communicate to people that hundreds of miles away you can still get these impacts, that's not an easy task. And it's something that we continue to talk about. Indirect fatalities is somewhere that we're going to really try to focus on, looking at the future. If you look at this, it's interesting. These are the statistics, generally speaking, over time. The pie chart there, if you look at the fatalities over the years, over past years with tropical systems, look at that. You look at the number there. Around 30% is cardiac arrest. It's those indirect things. We always talk about the direct fatality. It's the indirect fatalities also causing quite a few fatalities, as with chainsaws, electrical grids, auto accidents. Let me tell you something. I've never used a chainsaw, and I don't care if there's a tree on my house. I'm not using one because I missed that training. So if you have a training course in one of the counties, let me know because I might need to attend it. But this is the kind of conversation we need to have with these indirect fatalities as well. Maria, Category 4 in Puerto Rico, but probably in the elevated locations on some of the mountains, probably Cat 5 winds. You know, looking at the winds, we just returned from there and saw some of the damage. A lot of rainfall, flooding, and some of the indirect fatalities, especially death toll, actually is still not known. So let's look at some successes, some challenges, and where we're going to go at the Hurricane Center. So if you think about it, the first time we've ever issued the storm surge watch and warning, 50% of the fatalities are storm surge, and we previously didn't have a warning for that. It was embedded within the hurricane warning. So this is exciting. We're able to really highlight this and hopefully be able to get people out of harm's way from the storm surge. So no known fatalities from that storm surge, and we're finally talking about that a lot with the storm surge watch and warning. I think it's incredible. Now remember, in some cases, depending on the track of the storm, you could be under a storm surge watch or warning, but not a hurricane watch or warning. So these are the types of things we have to message, and that depends on where you are on the coast. So some other successes. This was the first time of the potential tropical cyclone advisory. Emergency managers out there, we're doing everything we can to give you additional time to work your timelines. Decisions have to be made at 120 hours on contracting. I get it. So we're trying everything we can to give you as much notice as we can. And this is one of the steps forward that we could look at. Even before that storm develops, we could put out a potential tropical cyclone advisory before it even develops and give you the products that you need to do your job. That's a big, I was on the receiving end in Louisiana, in Cindy, and it gave us an extra 18 hours, and it was appreciated, okay? We got some things to work on. We have to teach people what a cyclone means. So a lot of the feedback that we got, they didn't know what cyclone meant. On an international trip, the issue wasn't cyclone, but in Spanish, potencial and Espanol is a lower degree of readiness than some other words. So even in Spanish, potencial is a word we need to work on. So we're still working on some of that wording. Time of arrival graphics, once again, this is for your timelines. To give you that timeline of arrival of tropical storm force winds helps you know in your operations with emergency management when that preparation needs to end. So I think these are the things, we're taking the steps to get, it's really for y'all. So the feedback, I'm here the next few days, please give us feedback on these products because what we do is for you. Accuracy was already mentioned. A record low track forecast. The forecast was good. As I mentioned before, you know, even a perfect forecast, that storm still comes. But we're getting better with the track. Track errors were much lower than the 5-year mean. 36 hours before Harvey's landfall, the forecast successfully called Harvey to intensify from a tropical storm to a major hurricane, these rapid intensifications. That's incredible, okay? Look at this, this is interesting. Every forecast out of the Hurricane Center predicted landfall in Puerto Rico, all but the first expected that to be a major hurricane. We're getting better. And you can see from this graph, because what would a meteorologist stand up here without showing some graphs? You gotta show some of this stuff. So if you look at this, it's interesting, from the 60s in purple down to the black line, 2017, without a doubt, look how amazing over the decades the actual track forecast is getting. It's incredible. Okay, set a record. Making progress with intensity as well. Making some good progress with intensity, getting better. Now we're shaving knots off of this. I mean, that's kind of the way to look at it. We're shaving knots of this, and we're going to continue to grow that with time. However, 3 cones, blue 2008, green 2012, and in 2018, the red cone. Remember, the cone is a statistical analysis of our track record over the last 5 years. The better we do, smaller the cone. A couple bad years, cone gets better, bigger. Does that make sense? Here's the deal. This is something that goes back to the messaging comment that we've already heard. It's a challenge. The smaller the cone, the more impacts we have outside the cone, right? There's more opportunity for somebody to say, well, I'm not in the cone. So we have work to do with the messaging. We have work to do talking about the impacts well outside the cone and get people to understand it. The last 25 years is staggering. You go back to Andrew. If the models caught a low over the tropics, we were happy. The models have come so far. Okay, a couple isobars in that case with Andrew. And Katrina, more usage of the models, more usage of seeing that. Intensity was still a big challenge, and some jumps occurred, even if you look at 2005. But 2017, so many things have changed. 10-day model runs are being used. The models, it was amazing to see the models have that sharp turn. Believe me, a lot of nails were being bit around Louisiana, Alabama, all the other states going, I hope that thing turns. There were a lot of all-nighters that night going on. Something else has changed is you go back to Andrew, the Hurricane Center connected with the state emergency managers, national emergency managers, pretty product-centric. And then at Katrina, more briefings, more talking. But look what's happened in our agency. In 2017, we're eyeball to eyeball with emergency management. Local offices are deploying to emergency management operations centers. With FEMA, we're doing the briefings. It is amazing to see we're so eyeball to eyeball. There's so much information out there. I've never seen a time in my career that it's not more necessary for all of us to be together, because there's so much information out there and messaging is important. I want to share with these quotes with you. These are quotes that I've collected probably over the last 10 years. I just want to tell you, these are not public quotes. These are quotes from both elected officials and first responders. And I want to collect them because we need to have the conversation about these quotes. The first one, this is just a Cat 1. There's no such thing. It's about the impacts. If it's a large, slow storm, the impacts could be great as a storm, much higher category. Okay? Be careful with this kind of stuff. It's never flooded here before. Well, my house has never flooded, but I can model lots of storms that could flood it. It just hasn't happened yet. I've been through a Cat 3, nothing happened here. Probably a lot of you heard this. I like the next one. I saw the new forecast. That GFS thing says it won't come here. Whew. So we now have a situation that the models are on your phone, the models are on television, the models are everywhere, and now we have a society that's picking the model of their choice based on their personality type. You know it's true. I'm just glad you all don't do that. Okay, I got a neighbor that's a pretty negative guy, and he will pick that line that takes us out every single time. I got other positive people that will pick the line that takes it to another state and won't prepare. You see what I'm saying? So I've never seen a time in my life where we all need to be together on the messaging more than ever. So it goes on. I don't need to read them all. Be careful with some of this stuff. Oh, great, I have a GIS map, finally something accurate. Pretty does not equal accuracy. But I'm outside the cone. Back to the cone. A huge need to start talking about the impacts outside the cone. And the last one, we all hear this, we just had our 100-year storm last year. I got another 100 years. Okay, it doesn't work like that, as you all know. We need to change the conversation about water. 50% of the storm surge fatalities, another 25% is the inland rain. More people died inland from Hurricane Camille than along the coast, and that was a Cat 5. It's about water. If you add offshore, around 90% of the fatalities in tropical systems is water. We have to talk water. And maybe you have to change the conversation. I just picked a percent. Let's just take the 1% annual risk. If you go up to somebody and say, you got a 1% chance of flooding every year, what's the response? Whatever, I'll go play the lottery, I'm good. What if you say you got a 1 in 100 chance? Still pretty low. But what if you change the conversation in our preparedness materials? What if you say you have a 26% chance of flooding in a typical 30-year mortgage? Well, now you got my attention a little bit. What if we say you got a 27% chance, greater chance of flooding than having your house catch on fire? And we all have smoke detectors. Changing the conversation about water. Over 100 years, 63% chance of your house flooding. And by the way, all this changes based on growth, based on other environmental changes. Can we get to this? This is a challenge. On the right is a moderate risk of severe weather. If we come out and say there's a moderate risk or a high risk of severe weather, schools shut down, we get ready, we open up our operations center, we're all geared up, we bring our Fritos and Cheetos to work because it's going to be a long day. Okay? The left is a high risk of excessive rain. Do we get the same response? The answer is no. So this is the challenge. How do we get the same response for that wind risk as we do the real risk, which is water? So it's a challenge. And I think we're all going to be in it together to figure that out. How do you communicate this? This is Tropical Storm Cindy. Approximately 200 miles away, by the way. So now you're talking about somebody getting ready for something that's 200 miles away from that storm. Look at this, 7 miles difference in Jackson County. This is in Mississippi. Okay, North Park, this is interesting. North Gulf Park Estates radar, 12.2 inches of rain. 7 miles to the east, 3. So if you live in the 3 inches, this was no big deal. I got no problem with these storms. If you're in this foot, man, this is horrible. This was terrible. That little difference makes a huge difference. And what they take away. We got to spend more time after the storm talking to people about how close they were to that disaster, because people go away with all sorts of things and new benchmarks in their minds. So we got to talk about that. How about this? This is tough to communicate. Little teeny wiggles matter. Little teeny wiggles in these storms matter on the ground. The right one and the left one, compare the two here, it's interesting. So on the left, observed track, simulated storm surge. So that's the track, looking at Irma. And you can just kind of compare. Look at Fort Myers Beach, look at Tampa. I think that's some of the most visible changes here. On the right side is basically the forecast track. 30 miles difference, that's your difference in storm surge. So for the people that didn't get it, this is overdone. Was it? That 30 miles is well within our forecast error. Could have been either track. Either track we would have been fine with. And that's the big difference on the ground. Little wiggles matter, and we have to try to educate people on what that means. Be careful with the seasons. I'll just go through this really fast. It just takes one. It becomes a bumper sticker, but I wanted to tell you when you go out to give your talks and talk about it only takes one, there's some science behind it. Okay, 1992 we had Andrew, but not a lot of storms. 2005 we ran out of names. 2010 we almost ran out of names. We don't have a lot of conversation about 2010 because most of the storms turned. What matters is landfall. What matters is where they hit. And the seasonal forecast isn't a prediction of where they're going to hit. It's a prediction of how busy it's going to be. 2017, you can see the landfalls. A lot of landfalls in 2017, okay? So let's talk about where we're going. What are we going to do about all this? Here's some stuff we're going to do at the Hurricane Center that I hope helps you, and I'd appreciate some feedback over the next couple days. We're going to have a key message graphic. If there's a key message, whether it's about water or something else, we want to highlight it. We want you to steal that graphic and put it in your EOCs up on the screens. We want you to email it. We want you to get this out. We're doing this for you. So this will be some key messages about each individual storm, okay? The bottom one, we're putting the actual, you start looking at the wind radii on the graphic. Why? Because we're desperately trying to communicate there's a lot of impacts outside the cone. And we're going to work further on these things in the future. Where we're going in the future, we're really trying to look at this rapid intensification. We're trying to get to 7 days, everybody. We're trying to get there. We're going to do it internally for now, and then we're going to see how it does. We're going to eventually get that out there, so we're excited. But we're going to be looking at trying to get a 7-day forecast as good as the current 5-day, because we want you to have the information you need to work your timelines, okay? Pre-disturbances, we're going to work on that as well. And I want you to look at the bottom one especially. Here's the deal. It could be a perfect forecast. We can do everything that we can do perfectly. If people don't understand it, does it count? So we're going to really start looking at And it was a success, big success in the storm surge product, social and behavioral science, to really start looking at our product suite. Do you know the storm surge watch and warning and the potential inundation map had social science every step of the way? And some of you might have been involved with the focus groups. What color? What's it look like? How do we make sure it's understood? We're going to try to do that for some of our other products as well. So stay tuned for that, because we're going to need your help. We're going to need your help. If we're going to do this, we're all in this together to make sure everything we do is actionable. Going into the future, we're going to try to make a lot of the other products look like the ones we have now, because we don't want to make it tough on you. We want to make it easy to read. I'm just going to highlight a couple here. Extend the storm surge guidance to 72 hours. You're begging for that, and we definitely want to do it. And the bottom one is understanding and communicating those indirect hazards. So even after the storm, we want to keep messaging the dangers of the indirect hazards even after the storm. Watch out for the generators. Watch out for the chainsaws. If you haven't used one, you may want to get help. So really try to keep some of that social media guidance going well after the storm. So I literally can go on forever. I try to discipline myself as best as possible up here, because I am passionate about these topics. And I just want to reiterate, we can't do it without you. I've never seen a time, again, in my career that I didn't see that emergency management, the media, we all need to be together, because there's so much information out there. Too much information leads to paralysis in decision making. Okay, so we need to be together, and the studies completely show that a consistent message saves lives. So again, I thank you for what you do. Hope you all realize this is a friendship, and we all save lives together, and I'm so excited to be here and to meet everybody this week. So thank you very much. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it. I wrote that down. Little wiggles matter. So. Our next speaker this morning is my friend and yours, Mr. Brock Long, FEMA Administrator. William Brock Long was confirmed by the U.S. Senate and began his service as the Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency in June of 2017. Mr. Long has more than 16 years of experience assisting and supporting local, state, and federal governments with building robust emergency management and public health preparedness programs. Since 2011, he worked as Executive Vice President of Haggerty Consulting, where he served as Project Executive. From 2008 to 2011, Mr. Long served as the Director of Alabama's Emergency Management Agency, where he served as the State Coordinating Officer for 14 disasters, including 8 presidentially declared events. Prior to his position at Alabama, Mr. Long was the FEMA Regional Hurricane Program Manager and FEMA Hurricane Evacuation Liaison Team Leader, and my cadre supervisor. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Brock Long.
Hey, Bill. How are you? Sorry, yeah, good to see you. All right, where's Dan Summers? Dan Summers, raise your hand. He's to blame, okay? Dan gave me my first shot in emergency management, and I had to do a college internship. Didn't know what I wanted to do it in, and one of my buddies, one of my classmates was saying, hey, I did a great internship in New Hanover County, Wilmington, North Carolina in emergency management. And I thought, well, that sounds great. I think I'll do the same one. So I called Dan, and Dan was nice enough to allow me to come in and do an internship, and that's where my career started. But what Dan didn't know is that every time I changed jobs from there on out, something catastrophic happens. And so thank you, Dan. You're to blame for 2017. And no, I'm just kidding. But it's truly a pleasure to be here. It's been an amazing year. Honored to be here around good friends. I know many of you in the room. And I want to talk to you about the way forward. Here's what we got. What I'm striving for with FEMA is we're not the first responder. We're not the primary responder. It's not my disaster. And what I appreciate about Governor Scott and Wes Moll and the state of Florida is that you own this last disaster with Irma. It was my job to federally support your response and recovery goals. It's my job to support not only your response and recovery goals, but your preparedness and your mitigation goals as well. My job is to redefine how I use my staff, how we redefine the grants to ultimately help you achieve what you're striving for each and every day. And so the model that I'm shooting for with FEMA is federally supported, state managed, locally executed. But coming into this agency, what I've found is I've got 21,000 very dedicated FEMA staff, and trying to put them to work with all of the issues that we have all over the country and utilizing each one of them in the most effective way, the most effective way that we can is incredibly difficult. Right now in this country, we have 692 open disasters that FEMA's working with. Last year, we had 35 states that were impacted by disasters, and tribal governments included in that as well. So going into Harvey, this is where our map was. This is where we were going into Harvey, of where all the disaster activity was and where my people were. We had a large portion of FEMA put out into the field, helping local governments execute their response and recovery goals across this country, but we were overstaffed. All right? So 80% of these disasters that we work are typically less than $41 million. And I want $41 million to be a target for the emergency management community that we all strive for. If I can grant you the funding for a disaster that's under $41 million, can you manage it? Because this is 80% of what we have to put forward. And when I'm putting thousands of people out into the field to work a majority of these disasters under that $41 million mark, I'm not so sure that the agency is ready to go when America needs it on its worst day. And what happened here is that you have roughly 70% of your agency deployed in the field working these disasters, and then you have Harvey, Irma, Maria, the California wildfires. Who would have ever thought I'd have a volcano as well? There is a lot that's going on. But my concern, and just in full honesty, is how do we build the local and state capability to be able to manage a majority of the disasters, the public assistance-based disasters that are under $41 million. Not that FEMA's going to back away, but how do I send out specialized teams and staff to be able to help guide you through those disasters, and what are the tools in the toolbox that you need to push forward to be able to manage those things. Unfortunately, we're right back here at the same point. We're a couple weeks away from hurricane season. I have roughly 70 of my staff deployed all over this country again. And so we've got to figure out a way collectively, and I think my job is to be open and honest about what I'm facing as an agency so that you can help me and I can help you better. So we've got to work ways to figure out the tools in your toolbox in a unified manner to help us all improve. Some stats. 2018 by the numbers. As I said, I got close to 21,000 staff members. I've hired close to 1,600 people in Puerto Rico. I'm now one of the largest employers in the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, okay? We also have a large staff here in Florida supporting you to get through Irma. And we'll get to those numbers here in a minute. But the bottom line is the amount of money that has been processed. At one point during the height of the 2017 season, we estimate that we were spending about $300 million a day to help communities overcome disasters. Now, why do I mention that $300 million? When I put my old state director hat from Alabama back on as director of Alabama, my general fund budget was less than $7 million. FEMA is spending that amount of money in a matter of, like Alabama's general fund, in less than an hour and a half, 2 hours. My math may be a little off, but it's a couple hours. I'm basically spending Alabama EMA, that general fund budget, in a matter of hours. So there's a great gap that's there, okay? A lot of stuff that was going forward. We picked up a new event every 3 days. Every 3 days, if it wasn't a new fire, it was a new flood, it was a new tornado, or another major landfall and hurricane. And the bottom line is that my operational capacity internally does not grow with the number of events that we have. The hiring that I can do is basically on the recovery end. It's not on the paperwork and the processing and the piece that makes the agency run day in and day out. So we've got a business model problem within FEMA that we're trying to solve as well. But the bottom line is that that's why I'm asking for the targets that we put forward. Now, what I could do is I could stand up on high and say, hey, I'm going to introduce to you the new PA deductible model. But that's not the way I believe in managing the agency and working with our partners at the local level or the state level. We've got to strive for targets that we can all agree upon and be unified on how to collectively improve the field of emergency management in which we work in. So let's go back and look at some of the numbers to put this into context. You know, Ken Graham, who's going to do a great job at the National Hurricane Center, I think we can all agree on that. He understands what you go through. Ken was talking about the numbers. There's various numbers. We estimate that 47 million Americans were impacted in some way, shape, or form in 2017, okay? We estimate that, you know, basically these people either had to shelter in place, heed an evacuation warning, or experience some type of impact to their home or business. It's a tremendous amount of people that we were working with. Look at the hotel stays. One of the biggest programs that we have in this country is what's called TSA, the Transitional Shelter Assistance Program. We still have families in housing units here in Florida. We coordinated over 5 million nights in hotels across this country for people and families to be able to have a place to go until we could figure out more transitional home capability for them to go back into their communities. If Bill Johnson stayed in a hotel 5 million nights, that's like 12 or 13,000 years it would take you to do that. My hotel bill, I think we were paying about $3.5 million a day at one point when it came to paying for hotels and putting Americans. I think that the length that this country goes to support our Americans is unmatched across the globe. And we live in the greatest country on the globe as a result. I think that we are doing a lot of good things collectively as an emergency management community that never gets praised for. But it's pretty amazing what some of the stuff that happens. The other thing is that through physical phone calls, through 1-800-621-FEMA, or whether it was through the FEMA app, or whether it was through disasterassistance.gov, we not only took, you know, we still get thousands of calls today, but at one point, whenever the last time this number was updated a couple weeks ago, we had received millions of calls. Okay, we're still processing thousands of calls today when it comes to the individual assistance that's being done. But online, we've received 14 to 15 million hits and inquiries on people needing assistance. So there's a massive influx into what's coming into this agency that we're working with. 2.6 million Americans have been registered into the IA system in Florida alone. But it's one of the least talked about disasters nationwide. 2.6 million Americans needed support from FEMA to kickstart their recovery, not make them whole, but kickstart their recovery, which is a phenomenal feat. And the amount of money that's been put forward in individual assistance just in Florida alone is over $2 billion. Okay? A lot of money has been put into the hands of citizens to help them overcome. NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program, we got to get back to the basics. One, we've got to step away from the fact of whether you live in a special flood hazard zone or not. I don't care. The collective voice that puts out is any house can flood. We learned that in Houston. Over 1 million homes estimated impacted in Houston alone. 300,000 of them most likely are who we are dealing with in Houston specifically. And an overwhelming majority, the University of Houston would say that 80% of them didn't have flood insurance. And I'm going to come back to that. That's a major problem. Insurance is the first line of defense, not FEMA, okay? If you're not properly insured, you're cheating yourself. And we have to have a larger discussion about, with our friends in the insurance industry of how do you do an all hazards insurance capability? How do we go to parametric insurance to spread across, affordability for those that need flood insurance? Or how do we attach the NFIP policy to every home in this country? How do we do that? It's time to rethink it. Because right now, as one of the largest insurers of the country with 5 million policyholders and $1.3 trillion of exposure that we run every day, it's like pedaling an old rusty bicycle and trying to do it faster. What the country needs in the NFIP world is a whole new bike that's designed, and we got to work with our insurance agencies and our private sector partners to redesign that entire program. 2.4 million home inspections had to be conducted by FEMA this year. That takes 17,000 people. How do we start using technology to not have to do home inspections anymore? Or we estimate, or I estimate, and I asked my guys, if you were uninsured and you lost your home and it's a total loss, you know how many knocks at the door, or hypothetical knocks at the door you could receive from the federal government, the state government, and the NGOs that are out there? 15 to 16. 6 or 7 of those knocks on the doors are mine. How do I get it to one knock that cuts across the federal government? How do I do one inspection that can be used across the federal government, by the 17 agencies that put down disaster funding? Not just FEMA, but the 17 agencies that can potentially put down funding. How do we do one inspection that serves all of them, but then also provides critical data to our private sector partners that understand insurance and the way we need to go forward? So that's where we've all collectively got to go. Contracting. Something that I'm going to push you guys on is pre-event contracting and doing it on a blue sky day rather than through the emergency bid process or after the fact, and we've got a lot of work with that. FEMA had 59 pre-event contracts going into Harvey. We dropped 2,000 contracts to be able to service and find resources to put them from California to the Virgin Islands. 2,000 contracts. Only 3 were canceled, by the way. Only 3. So what's the way forward? One of the things that I've noticed coming into this, and I've been in emergency management my whole career, is I believe that emergency management and our profession is fractured in what we ask for when we need changes. It's one thing to ask for EMPG. It's another thing to ask for whatever it may be in your community that you specifically need. So what we wanted to do was create a unified strategic plan. We went through and not only surveyed FEMA employees, but also our stakeholders. Some of you in this room have been able to provide feedback or been invited in specifically to ask, where is FEMA? Where does FEMA need to be? And we got 2,300 comments back. And based on those 2,300 comments, we did a trend analysis and came up with 3 simple goals. Create a true culture of preparedness, which does not exist in this country. Ready the nation for catastrophic disasters, and reduce the complexity of FEMA. We're already reducing the complexity of FEMA because the strategic plan fits on 1 page. Okay? Here it is. Each one of these goals has 4 sub-goals that are underneath that we came through and started to analyze this data. But let's start with creating a true culture of preparedness, and let me tell you what we're trying to solve here. 1, citizens, in my opinion, are the true first responder. Police, fire, EMS, you guys are the first official responder, but citizens are the true first responders. So let's take like soft target events, active shooter events. FBI statistics would say that 60% of the time during an active shooter event, that event will begin and end before police get on scene. So taking data like that, how are we retraining our school teachers? How are we retraining business owners? How are you training your own staff to be ready to manage and be that true first responder until the official help arrives? Are we teaching low to no cost mitigation? Are we teaching our citizens how to do CPR again? 1 in 4 of you is going to do CPR in your lifetime. My guys in DC, all the employees I have do CPR going home on the metro train on a regular basis. So are we giving our citizens tangible skills? Are we telling them how to prepare from a low to no cost standpoint, or to the optimal standpoint of buying a home generator and fully mitigating your house? But how do we go back? And here's the greater problem that we have. We've got to solve a root problem, and it's not going to be emergency management that can do it by itself. But if 70% of Americans right now are living paycheck to paycheck, 70%, and it's estimated that another 50, 60% can't put their hands on $500, not because they live in poverty, but because they're so highly leveraged. How can we ask people to be ready for 3 days or 5 days? Go buy food and supplies and mitigate your home. It's an unrealistic financial ask for an overwhelming majority of Americans. And I know that's a sensitive subject to talk about, but that's what our campaigns are. And I'm asking that we go back and figure out how to do disaster financial readiness, because here's what I directly see. In the California wildfires, you had 5,600 homes burned to the ground. The senior citizen population was disproportionately impacted at the greatest rate, because what happened is they paid off their mortgage But to have a couple extra $100 in their paycheck every month or their retirement, they let their fire insurance lapse. In this country, there's too great of a gap in the insurance industry. Too many people are underinsured. If you look at the data in the Harris County flood around Houston, the average amount of assistance that FEMA puts out is about $4,000 to $6,000 to kickstart your recovery. But those who were fully insured through the NFIP program got $106,000. So do you want me to fix you, or do you want insurance to fix you? So how do we go back out and train, and change some of the root cause of the problems? Because my job is exponentially getting harder and harder and harder. Your job is getting harder and harder and harder as we don't start to address some of the root causes of the problems when it comes to building a culture of preparedness. What are the other problems that we see out there? I'm asking you, how do we solve them together? But this plan right here, I'm asking, is not just FEMA's plan. I'm asking all of you to adopt it. I'm asking for the whole profession to move together in a unified effort to solve these three things. Next, ready the nation for catastrophic disasters. Here's what's frustrating with me. One, I don't believe that the nation is ready for the low to no notice events. The New Madrid Fault, Cascadia, Wasatch. What are the low to no notice large-scale events that could occur right here in Florida or in the Southeast? And the problem that I have is that if you don't have the ability to do things such as provide your own food and water and your own commodities to your citizens for the first 48 to 72 hours, and I'm asking you to consider pre-event vendor-managed concepts to put forward, I question whether or not you're an EMAP accredited emergency management agency. Because if we fail in logistics and I can't get there within the first 72 hours in a low to no notice event, you failed all the way through recovery. And we learn that in this profession time and time and time again. So what are we doing about it to solve it? If you're waiting on FEMA to run your commodities, that's not the solution. I can't guarantee that we can be there right on top to backfill everything that you need. I'm asking you to do things like that. When it comes to operationalizing your capabilities. Work with the private sector vendors. Figure out how you can sign contracts with private water bottlers and MOUs to say you'll buy whatever they have in your community at the market rate at any given time that you may need it. How do we decrease the time frames it takes us to respond for the low to no notice events? The other thing is that I'm tired of FEMA only really being seen in the local community during the recovery realm. I would guarantee you that you only see us basically when we're in your communities, knocking on doors or trying to work through various recovery projects. So what I'm doing is I'm asking my headquarters folks and I'm asking my regional offices to expand our footprint to create what we're calling FEMA integration teams. We're going to start rolling permanent staff into state agencies and then eventually, hopefully, larger UASI areas, and we've got to figure out how to work with tribal governments as well on being able to increase our footprint and being out and a part of the discussion every day, not only during the response and recovery phase, but more importantly on the blue sky day of how are we mitigating, how are we helping you train and exercise. I want to help you train, exercise, and execute together and be part of that discussion every day. So one of the jobs that we had most recently advertised to start the FIT teams, we're going to be moving out to 10 states. I have to phase this out because here again, I don't get new positions based on the number of permanent positions based on the number of events that we go through. But my folks want to be out in the field. They're happiest out in the field working with you. And so one of the positions that we just had offered up to lead the team in Virginia, we had over 200 internal candidates apply for it. People offering to take demotions to go out into the field to work with you. So this is what we're pushing forward, and that's the model that we're going to continue to push out to work with you every day. The other thing is that we've got to, I guess I could say, make continuity great again. Continuity planning has been put on the shelf, but with the nation-state threats that we see and the cybersecurity threats that are occurring every day, we've got to dust off the books when it comes to continuity. Continuity and proper continuity planning equals disaster resilience. Continuity equals resilience. And it's not about how are you going to continue to do payroll when you've lost access to a facility or you've lost access to your staff or resources. It's how do you get your mayor or your county commissioner to be able to talk to Governor Scott on Florida's worst day? How do I get Governor Scott to be able to communicate with the president? What we learned in 2017, or what we've learned in emergency management is, it used to be interoperability was the biggest lesson learned. We learned it after 9/11. We learned it after Katrina. Well, what we learned this year is our communications backbone in this country is incredibly fragile to the point it was blown out in Puerto Rico and it was burned up in California. We can lose a server somewhere in the middle of America and knock 150 million people offline from their Verizon or AT&T or Sprint or whatever their provider account is. We've got to build resiliency and understand how we're going to communicate on our worst day, but we've got to work with the private sector to specifically build a redundant and a resilient communications backbone. You know, for example, in Puerto Rico, I'm very honest about, the commodity efforts. We spent $2 billion in food and water to Puerto Rico alone. That would be FEMA's 14th most expensive disaster in history. And the problem wasn't getting food and water to Puerto Rico. The problem was messaging because the entire communication systems was down. So we've got to understand how we work with the infrastructure partners and how they are interdependent on when we bring things in. And if you have no access to a port and you've only got one access, one accessible airport, but the air traffic control is wiped out and you can only talk one plane in every 30 minutes, what should be on that plane? Is it incident management? Is it food and water? Or is it our private sector partners that can quickly get the communications capability back up and running? Okay? So we've got to get better in our interdependencies and push forward. Next thing is reduce the complexity. This is twofold. I got to better the workforce structure inside FEMA, and I'm asking my staff how to make it a great place to come to work every day. How do we become more efficient and so that they can do their job and support you better? But more importantly, what are the 50-meter and 100-meter targets? What are the quick changes, tangible changes I can do now to reduce the pain that you see from what we put forward every day? How do we increase the disaster survivor experience in a positive fashion? How do we increase the sub-grantee and grantee experience that you have with massive amounts of grants? I'm asking for your support on that. I'm asking for the feedback. I'm the agency's worst critic when it comes to reducing the complexity and getting better. In closing, here's the final ask that I need. This is where from the way I see emergency management, and I've been at the state and the federal and the private sector levels, I'm asking you guys to consider and work hard on these things. One, here again, it's amazing to me that not all states have rainy day funds to do IA and PA when FEMA assistance is not going to be turned on and come to town. I often question that if a state does not have its own IA and PA rainy day fund designed to help its own citizens or designed to help a community do debris when FEMA assistance is not coming to town, of whether or not you're an EMAP accredited state. Two, fine-tune disaster cost recovery plans. Our recovery, let me ask you this question. All of you that just went through Hurricane Irma, did your recovery plan remotely line up with what took place in the field? Okay? If it doesn't, you got a lot of work to do. And the problem that we have in disaster recovery is recovery's complex. You need to sit down and focus on disaster cost recovery. Guys, we got to graduate past incident command and figure out how to manage hundreds of millions of dollars and educate our elected officials on governor or mayor. Let's do outcome-driven recovery right now, such as 428, Section 428, which I'm a believer in. Let's do outcome-driven recovery right now. Mayor, governor, what are your goals? Here's the funding you're entitled to, not only from FEMA, but from HUD, from SBA, from Commerce, from Labor, from the Department of Interior. There are 17 different federal government agencies that put funding forward, not just FEMA. And then each one of these agencies has different pots of money. So are we, as emergency managers, educating our mayors, our elected officials, and our governors on what money they're entitled to, how to use that money to accomplish their goals, and when the money hits? For example, if you want to put HUD in charge of housing, and you're planning on using CDBG-DR funding for housing, you've got to understand and help your governor understand that that money may not hit for almost a year after the disaster. So we've got to get smarter in the way that we design recovery plans, period, and pushing forward. And you're managing millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. That's what emergency managers do. It's far greater than just an incident command. Continuity, we've talked about that. Build capabilities to meet large housing needs. Here's what we need. Housing needs to be completely designed. Recovery housing in this country is totally broken. I've been honest about it in front of Congress. I can't remember in my whole career when a housing mission has ever been praised. All right? Housing's broken. Here's why. It's fully on my shoulders. I need granting authority from Congress to give Governor Scott the ability to control his destiny in Florida. What I mean by that is, Florida and the local officials, Governor Scott, you guys in the local level know how disaster housing can be done better in your specific community than FEMA ever will. So why can't you in this country go to the local RV dealer, buy every travel trailer on that lot, and let me reimburse you for it? But because I don't have the grant authority to be able to do that, we collectively need to change that. And it's a give and take. Let me tell you what I can bring in very quickly. Let me run TSA. Let me reimburse you for sheltering. Or maybe what we need to do is ask Congress to allow me to provide more funding to the citizen to fix their own home and repair their own home. Maybe it's more grant funding. We have to collectively work together to fix big issues like housing. Finally, establish pre-event contracts. One of the things that we're doing, I'm a big believer in the private sector. Emergency management is like a four-legged stool, all right? State, federal, local, and then you got the private sector along with the NGOs, okay? Work to establish pre-event contracts, whether it's debris, whether it's hauling, and I know there were some issues in Irma, but also disaster cost recovery. If you don't know how to manage hundreds of millions of dollars and help your elected officials, hire somebody to come in and do it. One of the things that's in, and something that I'm gonna ask you to listen to is, look at the FAA authorization bill that's in the Senate right now. It has game-changing legislation within it. Here's what it's gonna do. If passed as is, it would bring management costs from 3.34% to 12%, with a pass-through to the local governments to allow you a lot more money for smaller disasters to hire your own force account labor or to go hire a consulting firm to augment your staff or your technical capabilities. Take a look at it. The other thing that it does is that it also says that of all the money that FEMA spends in public assistance, 6% would mandatorily be put up front in pre-disaster mitigation. Did you guys know that? Guys, we got to pay attention to what goes on up at the Hill. Because if that bill passed today, next year, that would be $2.5 billion that FEMA would be able to put out in pre-disaster mitigation funding across this country. Pay attention. So the bottom line is establish the pre-event contracts, set those up on blue sky days, don't wait till the disaster hits. That's when mistakes are made. And what I'm doing with the private sector is working with them. We had a meeting earlier today with private sector partners on FEMA is going to be pushing out more of a pre-event contract toolkit to help guide you through it, generic RFPs, identifying what we think you need up front, and then that standard needs to be plugged into EMAP. We got to operationalize EMAP. It's time for EMAP 2.0 when it comes to what you should have in place and pushing forward. I'm passionate about it. I want to change it. I got open ears. I'm not hard-headed, but I need your help, and I think we all have to push together in a unified effort in emergency management to truly make real changes to overcome the problems that we see, and more importantly, protect people before, during, and after disasters. It's great to be here. Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Brock. I really like that idea of a one-page strategic plan. Makes a lot of sense. Our next speaker this morning is Mr. Martin Centerfit, the Director of Monroe County Emergency Management. Marty came to the Florida Keys after retiring in 2016 from the Jacksonville Fire and Rescue Department after a 28-year career, where he served as both the County Emergency Management Director as well as the Fire Chief. Marty became enthralled with emergency management after working the multiple hurricanes in our now infamous 2004 and 2005 hurricane season. He responded to Mississippi in 2005 for Katrina. He worked at the state EOC for Hurricane Wilma and represented the state of Florida at the Mobile, Alabama command post during the Deepwater Horizons oil spill. Marty has a master's degree in public administration from the University of North Florida and is an active member of the Florida Emergency Preparedness Association. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my friend and colleague who I dearly respect and admire, Mr. Marty Centerfit.
Good morning, everyone. You know, what a great opportunity for me to be able to stand up here as the loving recipient of Hurricane Irma this year in the Florida Keys. What I realize is every bit of the success that we've had in the Florida Keys, and it's been an incredible success story, is actually because of the people like you in this room. Everything we did, every success we had with Hurricane Irma was because of the help of outside people. Many of you that I've talked to over the last several days, over the last several months, took your time, whether you worked in Tallahassee, whether you were working through other parts of the state, or whether you came directly into the county with me and helped us staff an EOC. It was all because of you that we were able to be successful, and that's really what I wanted to talk about today. Because when given the opportunity to speak today, you know, I recognize that the theme of this meeting is readiness. But with that being said, what I recognize is as important as our planning products are, as much time as we spend putting together planning products to make sure that we know the processes and the steps to take, as much time as we spend on training, the time we spend on exercises, all of that is important. I'm not taking away from any of that. But the reality is there's a common thread that ties all of that together, and that's the relationships that we have, that we build in a conference just like this. In my mind, readiness is relationships. Relationships is readiness. We have to have that. And what do I mean by that? Well, the relationships start at even the highest level. You know, I appreciate the governor being here today. I can tell you he was in my EOC no less than 9 times over a 3-week period. I mean, constantly coming in. What do you need? What are we doing? How is it happening? Is it happening fast enough? Representative Nunez, what she didn't tell all of you is she's actually a ninja when she's not doing her representative task. She would sneak into the EOC and just stand back and watch and listen. It wasn't a lot of fanfare. It wasn't, you know, trumpets and horns saying, look at me. It was a quiet approach coming into an EOC and then quietly coming over and saying, is there any roadblocks I can break loose? Is there anything you need me to do? And that happened whether it was Representative Carbella, whether it was, you know, Rubio was there, the governor was there. Of course, our great elected officials in the county were there. But what impressed me is they were there quietly. They were servant's heart coming in, how can I make things better? And that's what I wanted to really talk to you about today. The reality of emergency management is if it happens to be your day to be the person that takes a direct hit of a Category 4 hurricane, it's going to be a very bad day. As a person who's done a lot of responses to other people's disasters, I can tell you the best disaster in the world is someone else's. It's a reality that is as painful as it is when you go to help other people in their disaster. It's an incredible experience. It's very positive, but never underestimate the ability of going home 2 weeks later. That's the difference. And when it's on your shoulders, it's an incredibly challenging issue. But the secret of the success is the relationships that you're making in this room. I've got a couple just real quick stories, and then I'll get out of everyone's way. You know, the first thing is the storm's coming at us. We don't have enough people in Monroe County. We don't have enough people to staff the EOC. Traditionally, we staffed it with 50 people. I took over 2 years ago. For this storm, we put 200 people in the EOC. Most of those were people just like you from all over the state, from all over the country. We had incident management teams from Colorado to California in our EOC, and every one of them was priceless to us. But me, you know, we did the 5 days of pre-storm, went through the storm. Then by the time we're the first, second day after the storm, you're absolutely overloaded. You're working 18-hour days, you're sleeping on a floor, you're trying to make it all work, and at the same time you found out that your house has taken major damage. You're having conversations with your family saying, no, you can't come back to town, you don't have a home to come to. And so emergency management is about all the people in this room, and I appreciate every one of you. Readiness is relationships. There was now the day that I will remember forever, just shortly after the storm. We were doing our regional conference call. Monroe County reported out what my needs were, what my issues were, and being a 30-year fire guy, you know, everything's real formal and straight, and, you know, we've got this. What people didn't know is just an hour before I'd had a conversation with my wife telling her she couldn't come home. So Monroe County reports out, Miami-Dade reports out, Broward County reports out, and then we get to West Palm Beach and Bill. And Bill did the meanest thing he's ever done to me. He stopped the conversation and he said, Marty, how are you doing? And I said, I'm fine, Bill. And he said, no, Marty, how are you doing? And I lost it. I literally started crying right there on the conference call. Because in 9 days, at that point in time, 9 days of running like crazy, getting yelled at, screamed at, cussed at, pressured, pushed, that was the first time somebody had looked at me or talked to me and said, how are you doing? That's the relationships, ladies and gentlemen. I looked at him and said, Bill, I need help. Bill left his EOC that afternoon, was in my EOC the next morning, and spent the next 2 weeks with me, making sure that I had somebody to lean on. That's what this conference is all about, ladies and gentlemen. It's about me picking up the phone and calling all of the people I'd worked with in North Florida and saying, folks, this is the big one and I need help. And when I look up and things are crazy, I've got to tell you one of the interesting things. Next time I have a direct hit category 4, never again. But if it ever happens, I'm going to keep a little chart on the wall of the number of times that you get cussed at and screamed at. Because everybody goes through stress in a different way. And people will reach a point and they'll lose it and they'll just unload on you. And you learn that it's just part of the nature of the business. But I'll tell you, when I'm in the middle of that type of day and things are going bad and we're trying to work through problems, and then all of a sudden I look up and I see people like Billy Estep, you know, I see Bruce Scott, I see the people from the North Florida area that I worked with. When I look up and the people that I did training with just months ago in the National Guard are walking through my EOC and I go, I know all of these people on a first name basis. The whole world changes. I get on the phone with Jessica and Kevin and say, boy, I really need a lot of help. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to leave you with this concept. I want you to think about something here that's so important. When you come to the Governor's Hurricane Conference, yes, it's a learning opportunity. We go through training, we educate ourselves, but take the time to get face-to-face with the people that you're going to be working with in time of the disaster. And they're all sitting in this room. Because, you know, I never once had a conversation with the National Guard during the disaster. I had conversations with Mike. It was first name basis. It was one-on-one conversations. You're no longer talking to an agency, you're talking to a person. And when you can talk to a person, the whole world changes. And I would like to think that when those phone calls would go up to Tallahassee, it wasn't that Monroe County was asking for help. It was Marty asking for help. And when we do that, the whole world changes, because readiness is important, but readiness is about relationships. And it's the relationships that you build here that are going to make all the difference in the world. It ties the planning, the training, the exercise together. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to just stand up here real brief and and look at each of you and say thank you. You made the difference for the Florida Keys. We have gone a long way in this recovery process. We're beautiful. We're the fabulous Florida Keys. We look forward to every one of you coming to visit us. But it's the people in this room, it's the ladies and gentlemen in this room that were there for us when we needed you. And so today I'd like to take the opportunity to say thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marty. I really appreciate it. I just want to point out that both Marty and our next speaker will be having a conversation in a track later this afternoon starting at 1:30. So there wasn't enough time for them to go through the whole process, so we gave them plenty of extra time this afternoon. So if you're really interested in the Irma story here in Florida, I highly recommend to go to those sessions. Our final speaker this morning is another good friend of mine and a colleague of mine, Mr. Lee Mayfield, Director of Public Safety and Emergency Management in Lee County, a position that he had moved to just months before Hurricane Irma. Prior to joining Lee County, he worked as the EOC Operations Chief at Collier County Emergency Management. Lee has worked for the Florida Division of Emergency Management as a regional coordinator for 10 county emergency management programs in Southwest Florida. While working for the state, Lee also served in the operation and planning sections in the State Emergency Operations Center during disasters, as well as statewide catastrophic disaster planning efforts. Lee was born and raised in Miami, Florida, has an undergraduate degree from the University of Florida and an MPA from Florida State University. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Lee Mayfield.
Thanks, Bill, and good morning, everyone. It's good to be here this morning, and we'll get through this and get everybody to lunch. Marty, I remember seeing Marty or saying bye to him last year at this conference, and I said, congratulations on the new job and have a happy hurricane season, and left. And I think I said the same thing to Brock about a year ago, and like Bill said, I took this job a few months before Hurricane Irma. So, Director Graham, I hope our luck doesn't follow you next year. In telling our Lee County Hurricane Irma story just briefly here, wanted to set the stage by talking about some history. You know, every community has that storm that they talk about and their grandparents talk about, and for us in the Fort Myers, Naples, Cape Coral area, that storm is Hurricane Donna in 1960. That was the storm where you hear the war stories about, and the storm surge flooding, and the Gulf water receding from the storm surge before the storm, and the Caloosahatchee River turning the other way. And that really was the storm that we started really thinking about in the days prior to Irma. So in our EOC, it's very distressing to see exactly what happened in Donna start to happen the day before and the day of Irma. We saw social media reports of this is Fort Myers Beach, the water receding. That never looks like that. So very odd pictures coming in. And that really made it real for us when we were planning for the response to Irma the day before. And 1960 to 2018 is a long stretch of time, and as we, I think, know in our business, folks have short memories, and that's a challenge as we're preparing our public for these types of storms. So again, as many in our EOC or in EOC statewide were leaning forward in their preparation for Irma, we too were in our Emergency Operations Center in Lee County, but we had an event about 2 weeks prior to Irma that we were fully stood up for. These are actually flooding pictures from our event right before Irma, about 10 days prior. And this was a challenge for us. It was kind of funny looking back, when we were activated in our operations center for this event, we thought this would be our big event of the next couple years. This was a significant flooding event for us. Lots of rainfall, one of those 1 in a 100-year flood events. And I remember one of our sheriff's office guys in the EOC, when we were in the room working this event, pointed up to the Weather Channel screen and said, "Oh, look, they just named that tropical storm Irma out there." And we said, "Get out of here, we're busy, we're working this event." And we slowly progressed and saw the planning increase for Irma. So as we tried to wrap up one response, I think our staff got about a day or so off. Then we were right back in there for Irma. The lesson there is anticipate those back-to-back events, anticipate those staffing challenges, and make sure you have gaps that you can fill there. Use your time wisely. The good news with Irma, from our perspective, is we had, I believe, about 10 to 12 long, painstaking days to watch Irma approach Southwest Florida and the Florida Keys. So from our perspective, that was good. We could backwards plan and absolutely encourage you to watch the clock. You can't get time back when you're talking about those decisions that you make. So it's no secret in Southwest Florida that we have storm surge issues and problems in a worst case scenario. And for us in Lee County and really all throughout the west coast of Florida, Irma was that worst case scenario as it inched closer to us. We've lived with that storm surge planning for years and really for decades in Lee County. So we plan for it. We know those maps very well. But there's really nothing that can prepare you for listening to those National Weather Service and Hurricane Center webinars where they consistently tell you, 6 to 10 feet, 10 to 12 feet, finally ending for us the possibility of 10 to 15 feet of storm surge is a really unique experience that I wouldn't wish on anyone. We finally, I think, gave up on our Weather Service friends giving us any good news whatsoever on those calls. It just kept getting worse and worse, as much as we love those folks. And the biggest challenge, for a decision maker at a local level to me is absolutely that evacuation decision making. Something that we have to prepare for, we spend a lot of time preparing for. None of those evacuation decisions come without risk. They're all inherently risky to a certain extent. You're balancing an inherent risk and reward with ever-changing information and information that is not perfect, but you still have to make those decisions. So that's something we're doing a better job of communicating that uncertainty and that risk to even our partners, our stakeholders who, we wanted to fully understand how we make those evacuation decisions. So I'd say if you're charged with making any sort of those protective action decision-making processes, take the time now, go to the training, go to the classes, understand what all those acronyms mean, and don't put that off until next hurricane season. Those decisions are very important and you should spend time on them. This past year was also unique in that we got to digest some newer storm surge products, and one of the challenges there is, communicating these products to the public like we've heard today. And the word that we focused on really was potential storm surge inundation, not expected. So it wasn't really what we thought was going to happen, but the possibility of that happening. And molding that message to our media and to our stakeholders was very important as well. At the end of the day, in Lee County, we evacuated a little bit over 300,000 people, which was the largest evacuation in our county's history, represented about half of our population throughout our county. And I know a lot of other counties and jurisdictions broke those evacuation records as well. For us, our storm surge maps are scary enough that where we don't have a lot of infrastructure, closer to the coast where we feel comfortable putting folks. So that was just a decision we had to make, and that was, I think, a surprise to a lot of folks that we would evacuate that large of an area of our county. But comparing it to the maps we were getting, that was the safe bet for us. So as with any extreme evacuation, large evacuation, we had a equally challenging shelter operation in Lee County. Such a large evacuating population, we saw just huge numbers of individuals go to our 14 public shelters. This is one of them, I think, during the storm. Overall, 35,000 people went to Lee County shelters, over 3,000 cats and dogs, one confirmed goat, snakes, birds, and a few other animals that I'm sure we didn't hear about or want to hear about. But again, a very challenging mission there, and we made the call early on for Lee County that all of our shelters would accept pets. That's something that I think we're going to have to just accept. We have a good relationship with our school district and our sheltering partners, and we just made that decision. I'll tell you the pro tip there is to make sure you have very, very good cleaning companies under contract. That was a challenge the day after the storm and the weeks after the storm, but I think in our business we have to just assume that you can say you'll have 1 or 2 pet-friendly shelters, but pets will show up at every single one of them. We'll have to figure out how to do that moving forward. We also saw our special needs programs and registries stretched thin. This was unique for us. We had about 1,200 people, about 1,000 folks on our list the week before Irma. That list more than doubled after the week, really the week prior and the week of the storm. Interestingly enough, the people that were on our list before the storm weren't the ones in large part that actually went to our special needs shelters. So our shelters were full of individuals who called last minute, we triaged last minute, or showed up to the shelter. So being flexible there is something we're building in. You know, we'll have the registry, but a second step there to be able to make sure we triage those individuals and expect that last minute influx. So fast forward to Sunday evening, you know, our dire storm surge predictions. I'll never forget the message or the call or text from our weather service Tampa Bay folks who said, "Hey Lee, it's you know, Sunday evening. It looks like the 10 to 15 feet of storm surge is not going to materialize." And I think I jumped and hugged the person standing next to me at the time. It was just such a weight off our shoulders that it looked like that storm surge was not going to actually happen. Here's some of our pet sheltering fun here. Again, flexibility in our business was absolutely key. We had areas of our shelters that probably shouldn't have had, you know, pets in them, but we made it work. So again, that storm surge prediction, you know, luckily for us, the possibility of that didn't materialize, which was a breath of fresh air for us. It wasn't great for Marty, I know it, in the Keys. But as we've heard a lot today, you know, such a slight change in track, really, this is proof of that, has dramatic impacts on what we expected and what we saw. So again, from a decision-making standpoint, that's something we're doing a better job of communicating. You know, we went from 10 to 15 feet of a possibility of that to almost, you know, nothing in the Lee County area, but just a slight change in track 30 miles, it would have been a completely different Monday morning for us. And that's what we were preparing for. That's why our decisions led us to make those decisions. But again, this is what we have to do better, is communicate to the public that the science is getting so much better, but there's still an inherent amount of uncertainty there that sometimes we have a tough time communicating. So this was, again, a perfect graphic for us to show the public and show our partners that a little difference and a little change in track can have all the impacts. So Monday morning came, and our job was to figure out how bad it really was. You know, while we didn't see extreme coastal impacts, we had lots of impacts that were more inland. And I think we're used to coastal impacts in hurricanes, but we saw significant inland flooding in areas that hadn't seen that in decades. So that was a challenge for us. And they always say you can't compare the previous storm to the next storm. That's absolutely accurate and proved the case for Lee County after Irma. Lots of impacts that we didn't see in Charley, for example, or Wilma. And really from our initial response to our points of distribution to disaster recovery centers and everything in between, like Marty and some of the other speakers have said today, communicating that with your partners was really the driver of success for us. All these little things we do in response can have the ability to be, you know, smaller disasters within the disaster, but communicating that effectively to our partners and especially the public. You know, we didn't love those 2-3 times a day press conferences sometimes, but they were absolutely effective at getting across our clear, concise, and consistent information. So communicating all of the things we do, both in preparedness and response, I think was one of the drivers of success for us. Another thing we learned in Irma was that as much as we want to work 24 hours a day in our business, you know, we spend 95% of our careers, for the most part, planning, sitting in the office 8 to 5, working, you know, these larger planning concepts. But we want to work when it happens. When the bell rings, we want to say we're the ones to be there and we don't want to go home. I'll tell you right now, there comes a time where you just kind of have to stop. And for us, it was a little difficult to accept help, like I think a lot of us in our business. We want to work the event. That's our time to shine. It's our emergency operations center. It's our operation. But take advantage of the help available through mutual aid, through EMAC, through those state and federal programs that allow you to get people to come help you after a disaster. We had folks as far away as you know, California, Ohio. Even the picture on the top left there is the group from the hurricane-ravaged state of Alaska who showed up to work with us for about 2 weeks. Yeah, we got the call and said, hey, we got 5 folks sitting in Miami from Alaska, and said send them on, and they were exactly what we needed at the time. So take advantage of that support. A great group of people from all over the country came to support Florida in a really bad month for us, and that will be forever remembered. So take advantage of it. It's the only way you will get a day off. I guarantee you that. So as we all really continue with our recovery and complete our after-action reports and somehow find time to start going down those list of improvement plan items, it really boils down to two things. It's better preparing our people and better preparing our public, our staff, our EOC preparedness partners, and our public. And that's challenging. I think we have an opportunity here to maximize what we experienced during Irma because it's on people's radars right now. That's what we're doing in Lee County to try and maximize those opportunities. And one of my favorite parts of emergency management in Florida is the people that we work with. And Marty said it better than I can, but take advantage of the people in this room through the emergency preparedness associations. I mean, just an incredible wealth of knowledge in this room today. If you don't have an answer, somebody in this room definitely does. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't pick up the phone and call at least 2 or 3 people from other counties or cities or state agencies to ask for support in what we're doing. So take advantage of that support too. So we're fortunate again in Lee County to have a great group of emergency management professionals. Some of you are here today. Senior leadership team at the county administration level and elected officials that really drove our success. You know, we were fortunate in Lee County that we had the background to put time into this in the decades prior. So take advantage of that leadership as well. So just to summarize, and we'll all head to lunch next door. We're all going to be faced with that event once or twice in our careers where the plan doesn't 100% cover it. And the only way you will get through those events is to be flexible, improvise a little bit, and call on the support of the people that you have in this room. That's absolutely necessary for success. So thank you for giving all of us the opportunity, Bill, to talk this morning. It's been a pleasure. We hope to not have too much activity this year, and I hope everyone enjoys the conference. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lee. And again, just for those of you that have already downloaded wait for me for just a second, downloaded that handy-dandy app, it's training session 40. Those 2 sessions are this afternoon over next door in the Hilton Hotel, the Coral Ballroom D, as in David. This concludes our general session presentations. I want to thank each of our speakers for their time, effort, and generous support of the Governor's Hurricane Conference. Before we leave, just a couple of housekeeping issues. Feedback from attendees has always been an important part of the Governor's Hurricane Conference. This year, we will again be conducting an online survey for your suggestions and constructive criticism. As of yesterday afternoon, you've been able to give us your feedback regarding the overall conference. You can do that so on your mobile device, on our app, on a computer located in the registration area, downstairs and just outside the exhibit hall. Or volunteers will be roaming the exhibit hall as well using mobile devices. Your surveys in your survey feedback will be available on the website after the conference as well. The link is on our mobile app. Just go to surveys, evaluations, and certificates. I stand corrected. It's not the survey comments won't be on the website. The survey itself will be on the website. Please complete the survey at the end of your conference experience so that we can get all of your evaluation, and traditional paper evaluation forms are also in the bags that you received at registration. Personalized certificate of attendance for training sessions should have already been distributed to you by your instructor or later this afternoon when they're over with. If you took a G course this week, your certificate can be received and uploaded into CertTrack and will be accepted by FDEM as official certificate for attendance for that course. Overall, conference certificates will be picked up at the registration desk just out the exhibit hall on level 1 beginning tomorrow afternoon. Remember that these certificates cannot be mailed. If you have any questions or needing assistance during the conference, please stop by the registration desk and our conference volunteers will be very happy to assist you. Just a reminder that tomorrow at 11:45, the awards luncheon will be in this room, and included in your full conference registration, so please join us. And now I'd like to invite all registered guests and conference attendees to join us downstairs in the exhibit hall to visit our exhibitors' display, thank them for their support of the conference, and then join us for lunch that'll be in the exhibit hall afterwards. Training sessions will begin after lunch at 1:30 today, and workshops will begin promptly at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Now, please head downstairs toward the registration area. I thank you very much for attending and enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a great week, be safe, and be well.